Just going to check in with Simon, see if Simon's nearly ready.
Yes, or no, but it's the Mac that's bothering me, and that's the usual aspect.
You're on a Mac, Simon?
We will be switching gears quite a lot today.
Okay.
So I have Mac, I have an iPad, I have a few PCs,
Excellent.
and since everything did work just prior to this session, of course, nothing works now. But that's how it is.
We've already had a technical failure once, so that's our lot now. It's going to be plain sailing from now on in.
Yeah, I wouldn't say failure. It's new beginnings. But we'll see how that goes. I have never ever used AirPlay on a Mac before, so we'll see.
It's almost a given to have one technical hitch during a user group.
Yeah,
I've never seen two.
No pressure.
No pressure. So yeah, welcome, Simon. Really good to have you with us. I'll let you carry on, mate, and introduce yourself and what you're here to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you. So first and foremost, I have a challenge for all of you out there. Because I will be presenting using the video feed, or that was the plan at least, since I'm switching gears so much, that's probably easier. So if you take your mouse pointer and hover that over my video, right click on it and select pin, and you should see me in all my glory. Looks like things froze.
I can see, mate. You're coming across fine for me.
Yeah, good. It's you froze again, so I'm guessing that's something then. But then you should see most of what I'm presenting, and if that's not working out for you, we'll change it to the regular way of presenting, but should be fine. And usually it gives you a much smoother experience. So again, thank you for inviting me. My name is Simon. I work as a principal technical architect at TrueSec. I'm also the founder of the East Sweden user group, so I really like that connection. And I think the name of your user group is East of England. And as far as I know, it's only myself and Sandy who are actually east of England. So I'm very happy to be here.
It's good to have you, man.
Yeah, and I'll be talking about how to protect data on personal devices using Microsoft 365. And why am I talking about personal devices? And I would like to start off by showing you a graph, and could be that Jordan actually will be referring to it later on as well. So I work for a company that does incident response, among other things. And what we can see is that since COVID, we have had a huge increase in attacks. And I think you can see that on Twitter as well, that there are plenty of hacks going on currently, and a lot of smaller attacks as well as a lot of phishing attempts targeting us as individuals too. And many of those are connected with COVID. And that's of course something that was expected. But something else that we have had to cope with during COVID is that we are now running on these. So devices that we have at home, in some cases, I have plenty of customers that for various reasons can't allow their employers or employees to take their device home. They can't afford to buy something that will work at home for them. They can't manage those devices and so on. I hope they have listened to this session because several of my colleagues have provided you with some good alternatives to how you can manage devices. But if you can't and you have one of these, you have a computer that's your own, where you have your personal data, how can we use that for work? Yeah, thank you, Ben and Jonas. Because these devices that we have at home, they are as much of a target as any device that we work on at our office or at our regular work. But we also need to consider this. We are all living in a world where we have more regulations than ever, regardless of where we are. I know that I'm in the middle of the summer, read the news about Privacy Shield being broken, so to say, and how that will impact us. I don't think anyone knows that currently. But we live in a world where we have regulatory reasons that can be local, that can be global, that can be connected to the industry we're in and so on. And even though I would assume that some of these instances actually will realize that, yeah, we are in a very unique situation currently, at some point they will start to look into, okay, how have different organizations managed their data, managed their access during COVID, and are organizations still working in that potentially compliant way. So we need to move the compliance tools that we have, the security tools we have, to a personal sphere, but that comes with a bunch of challenges. So today I'll be first setting the stage. What are we really talking about when we talk about personal devices? The other part will be platforms and apps, the different options we have for the different platforms, because it's likely that the devices we have at home aren't following your corporate standard really. They can be like I have, it can be a Mac, it can be an iPad, it can be a Windows 7 PC, if you still have those out there. I hope not. If so, they will be upgraded. And we'll then finalize this session with talking about data protection and how we can protect these different platforms and apps. So let's start by setting the stage. We need to have some rules, something to agree on when it comes to personal devices. So we'll have our lamps, our cameras, our devices up and running. And we'll start by talking about what is really a personal device, because I'm in several different discussions now with the product groups in Redmond, where personal devices, of course, are of high interest, same with BYOD. And we all have very different views on what a personal device really is and what BYOD is, CYOD. So bring your own device, choose your own device. We need to look into the threats and the compliance aspects that we have, and then look into the available Microsoft 365 services. But let's start with a personal device. And a personal device, when I talk about it, is something that belongs to me as a person. I've probably purchased it myself, and it includes or it holds a lot of the information that I think is my information and that I don't want my employer to have access to or read or inventory or whatever it can be. It can be this and that, breads and rolls, soups and salads, and so on. So that's really one aspect. It's owned by me. It contains my data, and I don't necessarily want anyone to have insight into that data. But it's also that personal device may not always be used by myself. I know that Ben previously talked about his children watching Netflix and so on, and that's absolutely true for my daughter as well, and then for my wife. I try to keep my daughter away from my work laptop, but at some points she enjoys writing on my keyboard since it glows pink, so therefore she comes in here and wants to use it. But that's something we need to consider as well, that other persons other than ourselves may be using that device. And we need to be certain that even though something would happen to it, that myself or my daughter or my wife download something malicious or open up the wrong site, gets tracked or whatever, we need to protect what's our company's assets. That's the priority from our point of view, at least. And we really can't make any demands on these devices because it's a personal device. We are currently in a situation where everyone does what we can to ease the situation we are in, but it's very hard for an employer to go out and say, yep, because of COVID, you will need to buy a new Windows PC with the latest Windows version. It should have TPM, it should have virtualization, it should have UEFI, and if it don't, you will have to upgrade it yourself and so on. So it can really be any kind of device, and we need to take that into consideration as well when we start to get data on these devices. And we'll get into that as well. We'll be talking about the different technologies and the upsides and downsides of using them on our personal devices as well. But that's a personal device. It's owned and it's owned by me as an individual. It contains my personal information. It's being used by people that perhaps shouldn't be using a device with corporate data access, and it can be any kind of device. Next up is compliance, and I really like the explanation of what compliance really means. It's the practice of obeying rules or requests made by people in authority. And I think we all have someone in authority that tells us what to do. In my case, it's usually my 3-year-old that tells me what I should do, and I should be compliant with her will. But in this case, it can be that we actually have compliance rules based on our industry or where we are or the data we are handling. And we need to ensure that we still are complying with this, even if we ask our employees to work on their personal devices, because that won't be a good argument. Yeah, like you did lose hundreds of personal details when your user used their iPad to browse an Excel sheet. Yeah, but it was a personal device. Yeah, but you gave access to it. So we need to ensure compliance as well. We need to have some way of reporting on what's happening with that data. So compliance is definitely one part that we need to take into consideration, as well as the threats that we have out there. And we'll be getting back to threats and how to deal with them, but rest assured, we are getting hit by more and more attacks as individuals as well. And it's not that hard once an attacker have gained access or started to look into the files you have, even perhaps encrypted your device, to realize, okay, this device was actually used to access a corporate network. We can see that this device have a VPN client, or that this device have authenticated to a certain Azure AD domain. So therefore, personal devices is definitely an attack sector to take into consideration, even though they may not be attacked for that purpose to start with. So my thinking is that we now should move into a very brief demo just to point out a few different aspects of compliance and threats. Somewhere here I have an iPad. There we go. See if this works. There we go. You should now see me in front of a giant iPad, and feel free to take screenshots. Please mock. I'm actually using more Apple products than I ever have been using before. I even actually have a personal iPhone, which I absolutely love. I'm really sorry that you're recording this, Ben, but that's how it is.
It's just evidence, mate.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. So one aspect to take into consideration when it comes to personal devices, and this is actually quite interesting, because one of the things that I find is that a personal device, apart from who owns it, can actually be applicable to a corporate owned device as well. That's definitely true for many of my Nordic customers. I even currently are working with a customer where we're implementing Microsoft Intune, and we went out and asked several of their employees, what's your company phone to you? Is it a tool for work, or is it a perk you get when you're hired? And I would say that easily 75% consider their corporate-owned phone to be their personal phone, and that it's a perk. It's not a tool for work, even if they use it for work sometimes. And therefore, they feel that they actually get their employer to get insight into their personal lives. And they are actually currently discussing, okay, are my employer allowed to manage their own devices since I have personal data on it? And one of the main aspects that we're currently looking into is, let's see if I can find it here somewhere. No, it's not on an iPad, of course. I should have used the phone instead. Yeah, there it is, contacts. It's the contacts. And now you get to see a bunch of my contacts here. Don't call them, please. But these are my personal contacts. They are all synchronized from my iCloud account in this case, or from my email accounts. But what happens if I add Outlook to this and I do nothing else? Then I'm able to synchronize my Outlook contacts to my contact app. And that's absolutely fine if your company allows it. But do keep in mind that if you don't do anything else, you're actually synchronizing your contacts from Outlook to the contact app on your phone, and that synchronizes those contacts to iCloud. And in some cases, with some of the customers I've been working with, that's been considered a breach of GDPR, because we are synchronizing privacy data or private identifiable information to a cloud service, which we have no control over. And therefore, we need to take that in consideration and protect it somehow. So that's one of the aspects. The other aspect, and we'll be getting back to the iPad later on, is this. So I believe that we all have heard that the new Windows is actually not Windows. The new Windows is actually Microsoft Teams. And that's in some cases true. We are now looking into Microsoft Teams as a platform more than a collaboration app. And I'm absolutely certain that, or we can see that the increase in Teams usage is much due to people using it everywhere now. I saw somewhere that they, on one day, they had more than, if it were 1 or 5 billion meeting minutes in Teams on one single day, which is quite extraordinary. But the downside of using Teams to collaborate is that we get much, much more than just video conferencing. While we're using Teams, and I think this is, yeah, we'll get back to it later, we can download files, but we can also upload files. So as easy as it is to take a person or a document from an internal source and download it on my personal device, which in most cases would leave that document hanging there without or outside our control. We can also inject data that shouldn't be in our tenant by uploading files that may be malicious or may contain personal data that from the moment when you have uploaded it to your Office 365 tenant, you as an employer or as an IT department are responsible for. So we'll be getting back to this, and we'll be getting back to this little icon over here, and I'll be turning on Zoom it in just a bit to see how can we protect these devices. Good. There. So, licensing. Behold. Licensing, like we have talked about previously today, can be an absolute pain. I'm aware of that, but that's also what makes it fun. I actually, like I wrote in the chat, enjoy talking about licensing because in many cases there are so much to gain from understanding what you actually have or what you actually can get from your licenses. But it's very complicated. As we can see here, this is a great overview and probably one of the simpler out there of Microsoft 365 Enterprise and the different SKUs and what you get in one of each. But for most of us, this is very complicated. And I will be referring to the E3, E5 SKUs during this talk because some of the features I will be showing isn't included in E3, which is one of the more common licensing SKUs. But if you find this complicated and like licensing in general and think that this diagram is a good help, there you go. It's Aaron Dinich who are constantly updating them actually to reflect the different changes in the licensing from Microsoft. You can find it behind this QR code, and I promise you it should be fine if the service that created the QR code haven't changed it behind it. But if you scan the QR code or just Google Aaron Dinich licensing, you will find his GitHub repository where you have a bunch of different diagrams for Microsoft licensing. But another thing that I would like, and this is a bit of a, that's the wrong browser. That's exactly what I shouldn't have done. So let's go there. I would like to point out as well is that we in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center under Billing and Purchase Services have a very not too well known but really, really good comparison of licenses, which goes across SKUs. So we have been able to compare like an E3 and an E5 sort of previously, but this comparison actually allows us to compare Microsoft 365 enterprise SKUs with business SKUs as an example. And if you are a company or an organization with less than 300 users, I highly encourage you to do that. But also if you're looking into the differences between the compliance and security SKUs, the E3 and E5 SKUs. So you just check the boxes, compare, and you can compare up to 3 products. And it will actually give you a readable, very easy to understand list and a comparison between licenses. So this is available to every one of you in the admin.microsoft.com admin center. It used to be in the preview section. That's why many missed it, but now it's in the general released one. So we did talk about the different platforms and apps, and we'll get back to that now. Because we have different options, and that's something that really bugs me, that why can't we have one single approach or at least one single solution that can help us manage these different kind of apps and solutions. So let's go back to my iPad. There we go. I'm sure that you're aware of the so-called mobile application management policies. And if you aren't, you're in for a treat. So in my mailbox here, I have an email. This is actually from a previous user group that I attended. So sorry, but Cardiff is quite an awesome city. And this is a corporate email, of course, protected by my mobile application management policies. So if I copy text from here and try to insert it into message. Why did it do that? Come on. Let's do like that instead. I can't paste data, which is all well done. So that's what we usually think of when we talk about mobile application management. But what's important here is what is really mobile application management, because we can use it together with mobile device management, so the regular Intune device management. But as you can see here, I have no company portal. This device isn't managed. It's only managed by the mobile application management policies. That means that I, as an admin, have no control over this. I only have control over the access to data and where that data ends up. And on that note, I will actually also talk about that from an Intune perspective. So let's start there. So this would be considered a personal device. It's not visible here, but I'll show you the difference between a personal and a corporate device from Intune as well. So let's see if I can find some other device here. Possibly. Yes, my iPhone. Whoop. And as you can see, the ownership is personal. This actually have a very big, or not perhaps very big, but a big impact on what I as an admin are able to see or not. So if we go into my phone here, properties, I can actually change this. And I would say that I'm showing this because I find a lot of organizations, and this is where we get into the challenge of personal versus corporate device again. I find a lot of organizations which have corporate devices in a personal state. And that ends up with you being not able to get full insight into your devices. And it may also be a sign of your device not being properly enrolled into Intune, but that's for another session. So what I would encourage you to do is actually go through your devices, the ones that actually are personal and for some reason managed anyways, ensure that they are in personal, And if you have corporate devices in a personal state, change them to corporate. It's just a flick of a switch, and the user will be informed about you changing it because you will now have the ability to see more on the device, but ensure to change that. Let's go ahead to apps and app protection policies. In the app protection policies, the MAM policies, so to say, we have the option of applying these settings to different types of devices. And since we're talking about personal devices now, that would be, let's do a new one instead.
Just so you know, Simon, we can still see your iPad. We can't see what you're showing us.
Oh. Thank you. There we go.
Thank you.
That's the downside of believing that you can produce your own webinar while actually presenting it. So we'll create another one here, and I'll show you the other aspects later on. But we won't target this to all app types. We will target it to unmanaged app types or unmanaged devices. And that's really what we should be aiming for, especially for personal devices. I, again, do claim that we shouldn't really force our users to have their personal devices managed, so fully managed by us. Android does that fairly well with the work profile. Apple is going in that direction with the device or user enrollment. But in general, I do prefer to have personal devices in an unmanaged state and only use mobile application management policies, and have corporate devices in a managed state. But it depends on how you view the devices, of course. So we have unmanaged apps here. We select just a few apps. And I actually like that we see more and more non-Microsoft apps here. It shows that Intune is getting traction, but also that a lot of organizations realize the value of this. So, like we talked about previously, we can here configure what we would like and not like to do. And to go back to this sync app with native contact app, it's something that you have to consider as an organization if you would allow that or not. But if you allow the sync app with native contact app, be aware of that next step synchronization, which you can turn off on a managed device by not allowing that. But on an unmanaged device, that can prove hard since it's actually not considered corporate data anymore. It is corporate data as long as it's in Outlook, but then it writes down a copy to your contact app and you will be able to sync that further on or access it with other third-party apps. So I usually try to block so that we only can open data in other managed apps on an unmanaged device. But how does this work on other platforms then? Because I think that the mobile platforms, and that's absolutely logical to me because they have always been considered personal. This has come a lot further than it has on the Mac OS device and the Windows devices. So when I started working with Windows 10 a number of years ago now, one of the technologies that I thought would be a real selling point for organizations to really adopt Windows 10 were what was then called Enterprise Data Protection, which is now called Windows Information Protection. And that's the close to equivalent of mobile application management policies. The thinking about this is that we can tag files. We'll see if I can work this out so that you can see. We'll do it like that. We can mark files with this little briefcase and therefore encrypt the file and also apply policies to where this file is allowed to be opened and transferred. This can be done both on managed devices and unmanaged devices. Of course, and in my case, as we can see here, come on. I've been more than kind to you, dear VM. You have more CPUs and RAM than you probably deserve. So we'll see if that works out. Nope. So this is an unmanaged device. It could be managed by Intune, it could be co-managed, it could be managed by Config Manager. You would still be able to use Windows Information Protection, but the upside of this is that the only thing I need to do to make Windows Information Protection work is by registering the device, which isn't a full Azure AD join, because that's something we perhaps don't want to do on our personal device. So in this case, the only thing I need to do is add my Azure AD account. It's not an Azure AD join. It's not an Intune enrollment. It's only me adding the account and be able to use single sign-on as an example. That's also where we configure our MDM and MAM policy scope in Intune for enrollment, where MAM always takes precedence on personal devices. So that's also important to remember, that we can set that everyone should by default, when they do an Azure AD join as an example, automatically enroll into Intune. But if you have a subset of users that may be using a personal device, we can add them in the MAM scope. And if the device is considered a personal device, it won't automatically enroll, which is nice. So this will be totally seamless. As you can see, I also have a small briefcase on my Teams icon, but that's still a challenge because I can synchronize data now. There are ways of getting around Windows Information Protection, and we'll see it in action soon. So how do I get it there? And how do I control what's getting downloaded at all? Because at this point, these devices or these files are on my device. I have them protected, but they are still there. They are still out of my control, so to say. I can destroy them by removing the account, but it may be leaked in other aspects as well. So then we get back to this. And I absolutely love this picture. I'm very happy that I found it. Something to give away as well. If you are making presentations for work and you are thinking of, am I allowed to use this picture or not? Pixabay.com is a great resource with free royalty-free pictures. So this is where I found it. And why is this picture here? Yeah, we're talking about, hopefully, data protection. And this is not what we want to have. We don't want ourselves sitting in the middle here, using our personal device and feeling that we are getting watched by evil Lego figurines with plastic weapons. We want a much smoother experience, but we still need to feel secure. So now on to the actual protection piece. And I will actually do that on the Mac if that works out. So give me a second to just log into that and AirPlay from that one. So we'll shut down my iPad. There we go. And there we have a Mac. which should be visible to you. Yes. So on the Mac, we obviously don't have Windows information protection. So we have to do it some other way. And I would encourage you to look at the Macs and perhaps even Windows and say that, do we really need to have full access to things like Teams and so on using the actual agents on these devices? Would it work in another way? So we'll use my Fin Nemo here and try to log on to Teams. And I've set up conditional access, so I'm not allowed to do that from here with the FAT client. But if I use my browser instead, I'm able to access Teams. And why would I do this? Yeah, this is the next step of it. Since I can't control this with Windows Information Protection currently, and I can't control it with Mobile Application Management, I need to control it somewhere else or in another way. So for the purpose of this demo, we'll close that one down. Sorry about that. Go to Teams. And this pops up. So we have talked about Microsoft Intune. We have talked about the built-in security features of Windows, or Windows Information Protection, which we configure with Microsoft Intune as well. This is the next part, and something I am really sad that more organizations aren't looking into actively, which is cloud app security. This is where the E3, E5 comes in, because what I will be showing now requires the highest SKU of cloud app security, which is when you actually can take action on the information you get from cloud app security. If you have an E3 license, you have the discoverability features of cloud app security, and I encourage you to look into those and start using them. But if you want to do things like this, you would require a higher SKU. Up here, it's changed the URL to an MCOS URL instead. And it will tell me that everything I do while using this is being monitored. So what I've done now is basically taken a fully unmanaged personal MacBook, prevented it from using the Teams app, using conditional access, then again using conditional access, allowed it to use the browser, or any browser really. But if I access Teams from a browser on a personal device, and we'll get back to that targeting later on, I'm forced to do it through Microsoft Cloud App Security. Sorry about that. And the user experience now is exactly the same as if I were using it with a regular browser to the regular URL, but it's using the MCOS one instead. What this allows me to do is that if I try to download the file, it will block it. So I'm allowed to do whatever I like. I'm allowed to get access to Teams. I'm allowed to do whatever I desire, but it's now being blocked. But then you say, yeah, but something downloaded. Yeah, it downloaded a file, which will tell me that this file was blocked since it contained data that is not allowed to be downloaded. And this is a very simple example of what you can do. Because this, you can prevent users from downloading data from SharePoint, from Teams, with the built-in controls in those tools as well. But what you can do with Cloud App Security is that you also can control this in a very granular way. So you can say that, yeah, you're free to download files that have a certain tag or a certain protection level, but not others. And report on that, take action, alert whoever you think is required, which you are required to alert. So in that way, you can push users towards the right client for the right operating system. And since it's in the browser, still remain in control to an extent that isn't possible on an entirely unmanaged device. And in this case, it's also that you can prevent uploads if you desire so. Or, which is something I've used a bit now as well, you can monitor what's being written in the chat and report and block on that. So if you work in education, as an example, you can prevent bullying in Teams by having keywords or make it learn keywords, which will be blocked and reported to a teacher, as an example. Now let's head back to the screen before we wrap up. And I see that we have a couple of questions, but I'll get back to them later. So the challenge we will be having when we start to talk about personal devices is how do we target personal devices? Because it's not as simple as creating a device group, a dynamic device group based on personal or corporate tags, which I talked about previously, which you didn't see. Since many of the devices that you may have already may have the wrong kind of tag. There's also a bunch of different policies which is not which you can't target to devices, and that's the only way we can do it. And if we target it to a user, it's very, very hard for us to say that this should apply to this user, but only on personal devices. So depending on the situation, it's very dependent on how you use your devices, what you can and can't do. You may need to be very creative with that. One of the possibly best way of doing this is that we, in conditional access, let's go down to my work from home, have an exclusion, which is currently in preview. Where we can exclude compliant devices from a conditional access policy or an hybrid Azure AD join one. I'll note one thing with the hybrid Azure AD join one. Do not consider hybrid Azure AD joined under grant controls to be a security mechanism. This is only for really for migration purposes until you have them under management. But if we use it in conditions, we can use it to target in a better way. So I usually remove device marked as compliant, because an unmanaged device, if you don't configure that setting in compliance settings, can never be seen as a compliant device. But that's another story. I have written a blog post on the entire compliance aspect that you can find on knee-deep-in-tech.com. But that's probably one of the better ways of targeting one user, which may be using managed and unmanaged devices with conditional access and other policies, or with conditional access policies that will apply differently on a managed device and an unmanaged device. So to summarize, many organizations didn't have a strategy for what's currently going on, which isn't a surprise. But now, when we have been starting to get used to the current situation we're in, find a strategy for personal devices and for remote work. I don't like when we have unmanaged devices which get a VPN agent and connect into a corporate networks. That's the wrong way of doing it, in my opinion. A managed device, better. I think Leo did a great session with Always On VPN, but I do prefer other ways of doing it, like SaaS applications, application proxies, or my favorite, WVD. Find your strategy. See, should we use personal devices or not? Once you have decided on your strategy, find a design that works. Ensure to actually think it through instead of using what we were forced to do now, which were just solve it somehow. Everyone needs to go home today, figure it out. Because what we see in our attacks, in the attacks that's going on, in the red teaming we do, in what I hear from so many organizations is that we don't have a good enough protection. We don't have good enough protection on personal devices, and we don't have good enough protection on devices that we are using at home. So take some inspiration from this session. I'm happy to answer questions soon. Find out a strategy. How are we going to do this moving forward? Design it properly, think it through, and then ensure that your personal devices should be as protected to the extent that it's possible as your corporate devices, and always have personal integrity in mind. So I'll just change that last one. And thank you very much for listening. And I hope that you now go back to your organizations after the rest of the session today and think about where are our users actually connecting from. Ben, do we have any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. That was excellent. We do. We've just had a question pop up from Andy Wilson. I can read it, or can you see it in the chat?
Yep, we'll see
wanted to
here.
read it? Yeah.
Andy, do you use conditional app control? Yeah, in this demo, I was using the app control to download it. I haven't found it to be that unreliable, but that's also it's the simplest way to do it. When it comes to looking into specific aspects of it, I do use custom policies quite a lot within Cloud App Security as well. But for this demo, I was using the app control ones for Teams. And then you have a custom option there, which will then apply the CAS policies as well.
Perfect. Have you done any work around securing Teams data with policies? So maybe looking at label policies within Teams, so that and I know this is a common scenario where you invite external users as guests into your team, but you want an element of control around the data. So we normally use things like label policies to restrict what people can and can't do with data. Is that something you've seen used within Teams?
Not to the extent that I would have liked it to be. I have been doing some work with it, but I think the main challenge with that kind of implementations is the rule set. And I know that Jordan will be talking about that for patching that. Yeah, we, as you said, we have Teams now. Everyone is using Teams across organizations. And then basically, when you should then apply the protection, what are we supposed to do? Which rule set should we apply to? What should be considered something that a guest should be using or not? Yeah. So I think that's one of the main takeaways as well. And that's why I call this a Microsoft 365 session, because there are so many aspects within Microsoft 365 which you need to combine to get that full protection. It's not enough with Intune. It's not enough with DLP. It's not enough with AIP. It's the combination that really makes it powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Look across the whole stack for a solution, because if you, I mean, on that particular topic about Teams, it's something I've come across before where I've been asked the question, can we stop a guest downloading a file? So if they're collaborating, can we stop them downloading that file? And then if you just focus on, say, SharePoint rights management or label policies, you're kind of restricting what you can do with that data. Yep. So you have to broaden the horizon and look across the whole stack to get an understanding of if it's possible. And you're right, there's a lot of leverage in the CAS.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's I've met so many organizations which say that, yeah, we have E3, but we can't do this. Yeah, but because that's MCAS with actions. And you can add that to an E3 license as well, but that's really the last piece of the puzzle for a lot of organizations.
There's a lot of value in it, and I get it. It's expensive. It's, you know, it's like with any of the bolt-ons, you add on one or two, and then it becomes cost-effective to just go to E5. But when you look at the value across the whole piece for E5, with the Defender Advanced Threat Protection, and I mean, you can start looking at it as a whole piece, then start to say, well, if I'm using E5, I can pull back on some of this tech I've got. You know, I don't need this piece of software anymore because I'm doing it on the E5. So yeah, always interesting conversations, aren't they?
Absolutely.
But
So
that's,
so I'll go through the rest of the questions here and answer them in the chat. And if there are any other questions, feel free to reach out. You will be getting the slide deck. And again, thank you for listening.
thank you for your time, Simon. That was really good. Yeah, I think there's a couple of questions popping in, so
Yep.
feel free to.
Yeah, I'll take care of them.
Yeah, we really appreciate your time. I really enjoyed that session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, if he's awake.
Hey,
Jordan,
now.
Jordan, how are you doing?
Doing all right. Yourself?
Good, yeah, thanks. You've kind of been with us all day. I think you've been up since 5 a.m. So,
More like 3 a.m., but yeah, you know.
That's right, 3 a.m. Yeah, the first WhatsApp message
It's-
was 3 a.m. I don't know how you do it. Is it coffee injected?
It's coffee, and as you can see in my shared screen here, I just perpetually am this tired all the time, 24/7. I took that picture last year, I think, at MMS, and I'm still exactly that tired. Fall asleep in the car on the way to the airport. Doesn't matter. Yeah, lots of coffee though.
It's relentless. Do you work with Simon?
I do work with Simon, actually. Simon and I both work at the same company. Similar focus areas, but slightly different applications of those focus areas. I work more in some of the disaster recovery incident stuff, and a little bit more focused on some of the patching stuff, and he's a little bit more over on some of the other cloud and other features on that side of the fence. So yep, we work at the same place together.
Cool. That's cool. Great minds and all that. Working
Something
together.
like that. Or, the other way.
We appreciate you coming to our user group. And I understand you're going to be talking about patching, one of your specialist topics.
I am. I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite things, which is patching. So real quick, a little bit about me. I'm Jordan, also known on Twitter as Jordan the IT Guy. I own a little blog post called Jordan the IT Guy, as well as the Is Config Manager Dead blog. And I also do some stuff over at the MS Endpoint Manager stuff over the blog site as well. If you ever heard me talk before or seen stuff before, you'll notice that it tends to be along the lines of being focused very much so on patching. And so today I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about the importance of patching. Now, everyone in the room is probably immediately going to go, but we all are admins. We all agree that patching is important, right? But how do you get the other people to get on board with that? How do you do that? Aside from the old argument of, well, it's important, it's a security risk. Look at all these ransomwares, look at all the this, that, and the other thing that's going on out there in the world. So I want to kind of take a step back and focus on how do we get people to agree with us and start to kind of focus in on this, especially now that we're moving all of our workstations away towards being remote. So first, we're going to talk about the real world impact of unpatched machines. Then we're going to talk about how to get kind of started with Windows Update Rings and Intune. I've got a quick demo plan for that, as well as possibly a video that we may even be able to share later on to people can have for after the fact. That's for that. And then getting started with patching through CMG, showing just kind of some tips and tricks and some little things to know about and be aware of on how it differs from patching when your machines are on-prem. So first things first, real world impact of patching, right? Everybody's seen this big green circle before, right? It's your big green happy, pie chart. Everything's patched all the time, 100% compliance, right? Looks great. Not so much. A lot of the time, it's not actually like that. So Simon brought up a bar graph earlier that shows a little bit about how our company is involved in security incidents. And so I want to bring up some data that we've collected over the last year regarding some incidents here. And what these are is going to be data that's based on real incidents from the last 12 months and does have some assumptions. Now, when I say it does have some assumptions, what I mean here is not that there's an assumption of what we think may have been, a compromise or something like that, but some assumptions around we are making an assumption that there wasn't some other exploit that could have been attacked, or there wasn't some other thing that could have been done. And in order to understand what I mean by that, we need to go a little bit over what an attacker's mindset looks like on a patch. Because most people think, and this was made really evident even recently by the recent DNS patch that came out last month, many organizations said, well, those DNS servers are on the inside. And since they're on the inside, they're protected because they're not exposed externally, or, you know, we'll just apply. So we'll just do a registry hotfix, or we'll just do this registry change until we have downtime to actually apply and make that change. And so it's been a very interesting and different road to go down for this. So what is the actual threat actor mindset for this? And slides went crazy on me there. I lied. Okay. Sorry. So Sophos did a report, okay? And to understand this data in the background here, Sophos did a report and they found the average ransomware cost. Just to give some context to this pie chart we looked at, the average ransom is about $1.4 million USD. That's 1 million Great British pounds, roughly give or take, based on the day-to-day translation between the two. That means that of the pieces of data there, that somebody potentially could have paid out that much money. Alternatively, and I'm choosing to use Sophos here, so you can't blame me for using our data internally and what we found in our numbers. I'm just using somebody else's numbers here, right? For companies who refuse to pay the cost, the average cost was 750,000 USD, roughly 570,000 Great British pounds. So if you assume the average, before we even get into the yes, no, maybe part of this, and what I mean by the yes, no, maybe part of this, that means that that pie chart represents roughly $40,600,000 to $21,750,000 on the high and low ends for either paying the ransom or refusing to pay the ransom. So what does that have to do with how an incident develops and how it happens, okay? And how a patch actually plays into the role. So from the assumptions perspective, we assume that the attacker in some way, shape, or form gains access. So whether that access was gained via either directly by exploiting a patch or was gained indirectly via a phishing attempt and then a patch was exploited to achieve elevated access is an important thing when you're trying to look at this. So I'm not saying, and I want to be careful here, I'm not saying that, you know, by patching all your systems 100% of the way all the time, you're going to fix everything. No, users are users at the end of the day, right? We click on links, people click on links in emails, they reply to the wrong email, send an invitation to the wrong person. That's the entire idea behind these different types of scams. One of the most popular ones, in fact, is the CFO scam, where you try to intercept an email transmission between the two, interject yourself into the conversation, and then go after it that way. So I'm not saying that patching solves everything, but what it does do is it limits the opportunity that once someone has gained access to the environment, that they can leverage that access against an exploit to gather intel and then execute an attack. So with that in mind, and applying that kind of logic around how patching fits into this, this is how I broke the criteria up into our yes, no, and maybe here. Anywhere on here that it says yes, you can assume that that means, from kind of the data that we've collected, that it means that if the organization had been patched for the particular exploit, the exploit that was used that gained access explicitly was what allowed them to gain access. Anything that was a maybe involved a exploit within the chain of the attack. Okay, and what that means is they gained access through phishing and then attacked an exploit after the fact, and something that was covered by a patch. So it's potentially possible that even though access was obtained, that had them systems been patched, the second layer wouldn't have been breached. It still would have been bad, data still would have been compromised. However, there wouldn't have been an attack from a ransomware perspective, or it would have been less likely that there would have been an attack from a ransomware perspective. So jumping into these a little bit more. Yes, 5. Of this total pool of data that we've got here, we had 5 companies where a breach that came in was either via something like an RDP something or something of that nature and that form, where it was straight up, if the machines had been patched, likely the organization wouldn't have been compromised. Maybe 14. This 14 pool, and this is kind of interesting because Cody's coming after me, there was a bunch of things that were involved around the nature of both third party as well as application servers as well, where it's those applications that are production running that everyone's always nervous about patching and like, maybe we can't, maybe we can. We need to schedule downtime and plan for it. Of the attacks that we saw, it was something around 14 that leveraged those application-based exploits. That means that about 21 of these were potentially preventable, either completely preventable or potentially preventable on the chart. No was 10. There was a chunk of 10 where, no, it really wouldn't have mattered what it did. There were other security concerns or other security flaws. So that means in a sample set of 30, over 50% were potentially preventable just by patching and making it more difficult for an attacker to come in. Means that, again, using our rough estimates here, right? Yes was 3.75 million, maybe was 10.5 million, no, $7.5 million in USD. I didn't do the conversion for this one. Sorry for everybody across the pond. I was very tired. That's kind of a crazy amount of numbers. And if you think about it, what's scary about this is that even just as recently as about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now, we had a lot of organizations that were resisting patching what was one of the most critical patches we've had in a while on DNS. We had organizations saying, well, we'll just do the registry edit, or, well, our stuff's protected behind a network firewall. It'll be fine. So every time you find a server that's unpatched, or every time you see that, just repeat to yourself, $3.75 million, $10.5 million, $7.5 million. Get your organization to start repeating to themselves $7.5 million over and over and over again. Everything about this when it comes to a C-level's understanding around patching is around cost, right? How do we avoid creating a cost in here? And it's really easy to stack that up against something like the cost of a CMG or the cost of a solution to patch things when they're not on premise. So I want to get in a little more detail here in regards to why the chain of attack again is so important. Okay? I'm going to share some details from a particular case that happened earlier this year. And this is also part of why stuff like early detection is important too. Earlier this year, there was an organization, they had an initial breach. During the initial breach, some data was obtained. Eventually, the breach was discovered. It took a period of time. I can't disclose the amount of time, but it was discovered. Once the breach was discovered, network access was cut off from the attacker. However, leveraging the information that was gathered, they leveraged a SharePoint server that was unpatched and exposed to the internet with an RPC vulnerability. They then leveraged that to perform a remote code execution to gain elevated access and gain access back again to the environment and come back in. Information like this, right, and being able to an attacker, when they gain information about what is or isn't patched in your environment, is not good, as one can assume. So it's very important that you patch the servers, and patch not just the servers you think might be likely to get exposed, but patch all your servers. It's also important to ensure that you cover chain of supply. I know in Europe you have very many things about GDPR and protecting public data and everything else like that. But something else to think about is when you're interacting with other companies you have domain trusts with, companies that you have other types of interactions with. Making sure and understanding and knowing what their patch policies is critical. So an example for this might be if you have a two-way trust with some other company, then you don't have patching control over it, ensuring that their devices are patched so that it doesn't crawl laterally to your environment through that trust is critical. So how do we get to avoid being on the pie charts? Well, solution one is patched like this. I have my big semi-truck example here. And we start looking at Intune, we look at our Intune update rings. Okay? Our Intune update rings are the semi-truck of patching. They are amazing at what they do. They just patch and they patch and they patch and they patch. They're consistent and they work all the time. Now, in order to get into that, though, we kind of have to have a couple of different possibilities. Our first option is co-management. No problem. It gives us access to our Intune right off the bat. All we got to do is slide the slider. Mr. Paul showed us that earlier today. All you got to do is just slide that over a little bit, and we can start moving our way on over Intune solution. Intune only, again, no problem. Config manager only, maybe a little bit challenging, but we have some alternate ways to, get there, right? Just depends on what solutions we have. So what are the requirements then for Intune and patching with it? So first things first, device obviously needs to be registered with Intune. I think everybody should probably assumes that by now. 1607 Windows 10 is required for standard patching, and 1709 and up is required specifically for feature updates. And there are some features that have additional specific requirements. I'm speaking specifically to creating uninstall options. Now, Intune is actually really cool in that it has that built into the product, unlike Configuration Manager. So let's talk about the cloud and do some demos. So if I pull up a little web browser over here. Oh, come on. Do a little login. So you can see I have my nice little shiny lab here going on. And I'm going to jump over into devices. And in devices, I'm going to jump into my Windows 10 update rings. You can see I already have a few here, one of which is actually running right now for my pilot update ring, and I've got a default update ring as well. Let's go ahead and just kind of walk through creating an update ring real quick here, just in case nobody's created one before. Windows 10 updates. Windows 10 updates. Obviously, it needs a name, needs a description. Next. Now we get to choose our servicing channel. So do we want semi-annual, semi-annual targeted, Windows Insider Fast, Windows Insider Slow, or Release Preview? I'm going to go ahead and just choose semi-annual for this one, just standard ones. Microsoft product updates, I'm going to allow those. Drivers, I'm going to allow those too. I'm going to allow those specifically because I have service devices, and two, because I like getting drivers. Why not? Now, quality update deferral days. This is kind of an interesting one here. The first thing about this is the number of days that it delays the installation and applicability of the patch after the patch was released, not after Patch Tuesday, after the patch was released. What this means is once this update ring is created, deployed, and rolling in your environment, it's going to constantly be updating your machines. You're not waiting for ADRs. You're not checking to see the patch feeds to see, did any new patches come out today? Are there any new versions of it? It just takes care of it for you in the background and keeps running. So I'm going to leave this one. I'm going to set this one to, let's say, if numlock was on, to 1. And my feature update deferral period, I'm going to change that to, let's say, 15 for my little demo here. And again, it's the same thing, except this time it's for the feature updates. And then our next option here is our feature update uninstall period. And let's go with something like 30 days. And what that allows us to do is just to roll back a feature update if we have a challenge or some type of an issue with a feature update and a piece of custom software or something like that. And for whatever reason, can't get it working, need to be able to roll it back. Next, we have our user experience settings. Now, user experience settings have changed a lot lately. We now have a bunch of different options that we can provide to the user. It used to be we basically had 2. Now we have allow install and maintenance time. We can actually create a maintenance time, auto install and restart at a scheduled time, auto install and reboot without end user control, or reset to default. I'm going to go ahead and choose auto install and reboot without end user control because I'm just going to be mean to myself because, why not? I'm going to skip my restart checks. Basically, it just checks to see, battery stuff like that. It's all for my VM, so I don't really care. Option to pause Windows updates. I guess I'll let that one go by. And then an option to check for Windows updates. I'll leave that enabled as well, just in case I need to hit the button and try and force a check or something like that. Then, of course, we've got our reminders option here to remind users. I think if any of you have seen my stuff on Twitter before, you've probably seen me post that. I can actually show you guys what it looks like if you haven't seen it. I've got a history of it here somewhere. It's basically a large blue box that pops up in there, and it does that. I'll post that in the chat later on so that people can see it, so that I can just keep moving here. And then remind user of the required auto restarts with a permanent reminder. It's the same thing as what you see in Config Manager, but again, a little bit different because it's Intune. So in this case, I'm going to do, let's say, 8 hours, and I'm going to do 30 minutes. And I'll do it for the default Windows Update notifications. And let's go ahead and go next. Now I'm going to choose a group of devices in this particular case. Could do users, could do devices. Seems kind of weird to do users in this case, but I'll do this. In this case, I'm going to choose all of my machines that are in my mobile patching one, not my INFRDG. I've got my Azure group there, and hit next. I get a moment to review the settings I just created for that update ring and hit create. And we're done. Now, let's say that I want to take a look at this ring and see how it's doing after the fact. So I can go ahead and I can actually click here and I can see how it's doing. I can actually see how it's doing on the machines, what machines have worked at it and it's succeeded, which ones have had errors, conflicts, pendings, etc. as it goes along through. I can also check the device status to see who's actually assigned it. These two laptops are currently turned off. One of them is sitting right there. The other one's sitting at home and is still turned off. I can actually go in and I can see how is it currently deployed? Does it have the policy or not yet? So if I jump up here to something like, let's go up to, oops, this one. You can see I've actually got it here, and this one's been created long enough that it's actually been targeted to the machine. Actually has it, and you can see that it's successfully installed. Now up here, this is what I was talking about before, and this is what makes the Intune update rings and patching via Intune a lot more interesting to me right now, is the fact that we have an option to directly uninstall. We can actually click and say uninstall the most recent feature pack, and it'll tell the agent on the end device to uninstall the most recent feature or to uninstall the most recent quality from it. You can also pause the feature or the quality update rolling deployment that is created by the ring. And of course, you can delete the whole ring if you want to delete the whole ring. So we've talked a little bit about creating different patch rings here, but what about Config Manager and CMG? So Leo talked a little bit about VPN earlier, and one of the big arguments and one of the big conversations that I'm still getting pushback from on customers is, well, but we have VPN, or but we don't have VPN, and we want to set up CMG. So how do we solve that from a patching perspective with Config Manager and CMG for clients that don't yet have a CMG? No VPN? Okay, well, let's go start trying to implement CMG. We don't even have to have the conversation around, should we shove updates through the tunnel? Should we send them to Microsoft Update? We don't even have to have the conversation. We just immediately move towards trying to set up and work through the CMG side of things. Granted, we might have some challenges, as were identified earlier, around how do we get certificates? How do we handle tokens? How do we, get the actual clients enrolled properly to make sure that they're aware of the CMG? That becomes very much a challenge when there's no VPN for those clients and everybody's taking the devices home. VPN force tunnel, everything is now through the VPN. If that's your only option, it's your only option. Sorry for your network at that point, because everything has to come from the data center. And if you have one concentrator where all the VPN connections come in, it's likely going to come from a single distribution point. And hopefully the server is capable of taking it, depending on the size and scale of your environment. VPN standard split tunnel, corporate goes in, everything else out. Okay, now we're working with some stuff here. This is nice. We can actually then create an idea where if it's something that is an on-prem app or is an app that we want to be taken care of from a distribution point, we can have it download from a distribution point on-prem, but we can force our software updates to come from the cloud, no problem. And VPN tunnel with exceptions, again, the exact same logic. And then last but not least, we've got CMG. You've already got CMG. Okay, but what are the differences and what are the things you need to look for in ADRs? And my absolute favorite one that I heard last week was, so if we're using CMG, that means we don't have to worry about WSUS anymore, right? No, you still have to worry about WSUS. These are still things that you need to be aware of. and stuff you have to actually take care of. So, without further ado, wait, it's all WSUS? Always has been. Let's take a quick look through here and see a couple of config manager things and gotchas. So Paul actually mentioned something earlier that I want to show you guys here real quick, because I actually was troubleshooting an issue back about 2-3 weeks ago, where someone had set up CMG, had got it all deployed, and it was deploying applications, and everything seemed to be working great, but software updates wouldn't deploy. And after doing a little bit of digging and doing a little research in their environment, I came and found out that they were kind of sort of missing this checkbox. And if you want updates to work in your environment through the CMG, you kind of sort of need this checkbox. And you also need to make sure that you actually allow the internet and intranet client connections as well. So make sure that you have the checkbox checked if you're actually going to go forward with using CMG for software updates. Next thing is that I want to talk about in your ADRs really quickly here. So, and if you've never heard before, ADRs are probably my favorite thing. Let's take a look at Workstations, deployment settings, and let's go here. Download settings. So this little one right here is the important guy. Depending on your VPN configuration and your VPN setup, and depending on how you're distributing content, this is what you need to be careful of. You want to make sure that if a client is out there and on the internet, that you want it to go to Microsoft Update to download the content. However, if you have an environment where you split tunneling or something like that is a problem for you, or you have it, right, but you can't get to, say, the Microsoft Update features because they're blocked due to a configuration issue, then you need to make sure that this is unchecked, even if you're using a CMG or something like that where the rest of the service works. Something to be aware of is that there's no charge for downloading content for Microsoft Updates. There is, however, still a charge for having the content on your CMG distribution point. I think Rob York, he put out a really good blog post maybe 2 weeks ago or something like that, that detailed it out. The cost, I think it was, no, it would have been a couple of months ago, actually. It was back in April. The cost for April software patches alone for clients was something like, I think between 1 and 10 cents, depending on the number of updates that it was missing. So even if you use your CMG and you actually distribute it to your cloud-based distribution point and you force clients to go and distribute it to it, it's not like it's going to break the bank in the process of doing that. Next, I want to show you a little tiny demo here of how to check out and see if your client is actually using your CMG. So I have a nice shiny demo duck client here. Let's go ahead and we'll turn on real quick. I had to roll updates back on this machine last night so that I could actually do this demo today, because since I'm constantly doing patching demos for my customers, my lab is perpetually in a state of either 100% patched or broken, because I was trying to see why somebody else's environment was broken and did something bad to my environment. Okay, you're not going to scale. That's fine. Okay. Give that a second here to spin up. Okay. And let's go ahead and log into you. And just a quick look here. Thank you, Ben, for posting that blog post in the chat for me. I actually have that. It's in the PowerPoint slide as well, in case people need it afterwards.
Cool, thanks, mate. I mean, while that's loading, there was a quick question. Ian Clark has asked, how is the best approach for updating drivers for different device vendors in Intune? You've got a quick answer for that?
I don't have a quick answer for that, unfortunately. There's some long answers to that particular one, as well as I know some current solutions, shall we say, from the community that are actually helping out with that one. Maurice Daly actually has a tool that does a really good job of that, that actually creates a service that runs on the machine to handle driver updates, specifically for drivers, for non-Microsoft and other vendors, that you can deploy via Intune, and it runs, has a nice little toast notification. He released that last year in May, I think it was, or something like that. Didn't get a ton of traction right off the bat, but it is out there and it is an available one. It's in the same repository as the one, or not the same repository, the same project as the one that you just linked, the same profile, but it's actually a different project. It's a little tiny web service app, so that runs the toast notification on the machine, actually creates and installs one. That's the driver automation tool, and that does for Configuration Manager, to package them for Configuration Manager. I can find the link here in a bit if you don't find it, and share it. It's on the MS Endpoint Manager blog site. But that would be a good first start. The big challenge with that one is that there's no controls built into it from a centralized management standpoint, which personally I don't care, right? I vote go, update now, update faster, right? However, thank you, Sandy. Yep. That drivers as a service thing is what it's called. I couldn't remember what he called it. I don't think he's done any development on it since then at this point. But that was a very good, quick tool and a way to go forward to it. All right, so got my client here booted up, and just to show you all real quick. And just to show you, I'm on PKI. As Paul mentioned earlier, I have PKI infrastructure in my environment because I like PKI. Why not? And I'm using an always internet client here. Now, oops, I didn't mean to close that. What I want to show you is a couple of quick things, is how to figure out, because in Windows 10, if you haven't done a ton of troubleshooting with the Windows 10 pieces yet for software updates, they have made it trickier, shall we say, to figure out where certain log files and things are now. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a software update scan cycle. This is going to tell the client to go out, scan against WSUS, or, you know, if you weren't using Config Manager, tell you to go scan against Microsoft and say, hey, find the stuff. And then while that's doing that, I'm going to do this. Let's see if it'll let me do this as a not elevated user. I think it'll let me, since I'm just writing to my profile. Do a quick get Windows update log. Open with. Apparently this machine decided to feature update last night. So I was having a mini heart attack this morning because I was trying to make sure. And so what you can actually see here is if you come in, you can actually see that currently the client is scanning against my cloudapp.net proxy server. It's actually leveraging the CMG, same way as it would regular WSUS, just going out using the web as a proxy, basically using the CMG as a proxy to go talk to WSUS, go in, figure out what updates it's missing or it's not missing. And if we're patient enough, which I probably wasn't patient enough here, we do this. Our software center friend. This. And if we give it a minute here, we should have this. Now, what is nice about this, the extent of the configuration for software updates past building the CMG, like what he was showing you before, is pretty much just enabling the checkbox down there. And then making sure that your deployments and your logic for where to get the content from fits your environment. And that's the big thing, is making sure that how you get content for updates fits your environment. There have also been a lot of changes to ADRs as well, for helping to ensure that they get better filtering, especially in recent versions. And of course, I don't have the time to fully get into this, I don't think. All of this is assuming that your configuration manager WSUS is healthy, right? Because again, it's always been WSUS at this point, at least. It always is WSUS. So make sure that you've got your expireds cleaned up. Make sure that if you're using you can use one of the community tools. If you are running a version and haven't gotten to it yet, there is a new checkbox option in. Oops, not there. Here. Make sure that you have your WSUS maintenance checkboxes checked. New features, shiny in here, very, very shiny. Make sure that these are checked and configured as well. Because this is all dependent on this being healthy in the first place. And we haven't quite gotten you done yet. Yeah. Just started syncing through. But yep, and that's towards the end of it. Any questions, comments, or concerns about my sanity?
I think we should just stick to the presentation.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I was just joking. That's really good. Really good. There's some cool resources out there, isn't there, for the CMG side of things and setting it up. So I know Justin Chalfont's got some good videos on it, hasn't he?
Yep. Yeah, and I didn't want to touch too much on setting it up since we watched Paul do it once already earlier this morning. So I kind of skimmed over some of those and just went around and focused on the differences for that, which is basically it's a checkbox, and then making sure that your ADRs are configured to download things the right way and the way you want.
Yeah.
The bigger focus is that the cost of being unpatched at this point is way more than what anyone thinks it is. And the cost of a CMG, the cost, right, of $100 to run a few thousand machines for most organizations is peanuts compared to the cost of what it takes to run a security incident. You don't want to see my face at 4 o'clock in the morning because I'm helping you rebuild your environment because of a security incident. You want to see my face here in user groups, not on security incident calls.
That's really good advice, isn't it? I think that's always been a tough conversation, hasn't it? To get the organizations to recognize that for a relatively small upfront cost to protect your machines with updates, you know, like you've just said, you offset that against the cost of the fine, and the two aren't comparable, are they?
No.
So I guess the challenge, I know I've certainly encountered it, and I'm sure others have, is having that conversation and making it stick higher up. Or just show them your slide with the prices.
Yes, yeah.
Involved and the fines involved.
Yep, that whole slide deck, that'll all be there, and that'll be that'll be shared. So
cool. Thank you, Jordan.
I wanted to get that in there so people could take that back to their security team and also their fellow server engineers who go, well, but if we patch it, it might take the server down. Well, but if you don't patch it,
somebody will take your server down.
And it'll cost this much versus.
That's cool. I'm just checking through the chat to see if there's any questions.
Let's see, can work on answering some of those if we want to let Cody start talking.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, let's keep the momentum going. Thank you again, Jordan. It's been a privilege to have you with us.
Absolutely.
You're probably going to sleep well tonight if you've been up so early.
Absolutely.
Cool. Thank you, mate.
Yep.
Yeah, so I actually haven't spoke to Cody today, so I'm hoping he's there. Cody?
I'm here somewhere.
How you doing?
Pretty good. How are you?
Good. I'm good, thank you. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah.
I guess your session flows really nicely from what Jordan was just talking about patching there.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, definitely. And definitely kind of follows right along too, just because some of the things I'm going to touch on are kind of CMG specific, which he kind of hit a couple of those points, which is awesome. So hopefully we can kind of build on that momentum and kind of discuss some of the additional considerations and some of the value from making sure that third-party products are patched and kind of how you can do that.
Oh, I thought the session was you don't need to patch third-party products.
Well, that's, depending on who you ask.
Cool.
Here.
So I'll hand over to you then, Cody. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Let's see here. Is that reasonably sized? Can you guys see?
Yeah, we got you. I'll hide
Awesome. Good deal. So I am Cody Mathis. I do work for Patch My PC. I'm an engineer here. Now this, not really like this isn't sponsored or anything. I just work with third-party patching, and so I thought it would be a really good topic with everything going on to discuss kind of how we can currently, with kind of existing tool sets, do third-party patching, even with all of the craziness going on with COVID and such. So I'm going to show off some things. Now, some of them we've kind of developed as part of our product, but I also want to make sure that I convey that you can do these things yourself. You don't even need to buy anything, right? You can absolutely recreate all this stuff on your own. So kind of a little bit of a joke, right? It's kind of like third-party packaging in a legacy world, and you'll kind of see why I mention that up front as we go through this, because there's not a lot of awesome options when it comes to Intune and third-party patching for kind of various reasons. There's some community members out there getting really creative and doing some cool stuff, and I think that we could really empower organizations to get creative too and do some interesting things. So, well, high level, right? What are we discussing, and why are we discussing it? So I'm going to compare them. They're similar, they're different. There's a lot of things are going to be kind of seamless. If you've ever done any third-party patching from SCCM, like with those catalogs that are there, you probably notice that kind of once things are set up, you're just patching. You're just patching. It's very, very, very similar. And then I kind of want to focus on those things that are the same, because once you've got that level of familiarity, you're gonna have that comfortability, and having a good understanding is always going to help you to troubleshoot it and to be able to kind of work with it a little bit better. So familiarity is kind of that first step. And then, of course, what's different? There are some differences, some pretty key differences that can really kind of trip you up. And kind of moving past the legacy method, which we'll discuss, what are some options with the kind of cloud options with Intune? So to kind of reiterate, right? Why are we even talking about third-party patching? And Jordan really just kind of hit it right on the nail. We're concerned with vulnerabilities. That's just really what it boils down to, because it's like when you've got awesome access to your devices and you've got amazing visibility, at least from what you know, it's just not cool. We're gonna update everything, or even let all your software auto update, and it's great. Yeah, they've got Flash, but I think auto update's enabled and like everything's good. But realistically, from a large enterprise perspective, your concern isn't that somebody has the latest features in Firefox usually, or the latest features in any given third-party app. You might get some business-specific requests from, maybe HR or payroll or somebody, but ultimately, at scale, you're concerned about vulnerabilities. You're patching the CVEs. You're trying to fix 0 days. So that's the real focus of third-party patching, just like it is with first-party patching. So third-party patching, kind of the angle I'm coming at least initially here, is these kind of catalogs, right? So this was a feature that Microsoft introduced in, maybe 1806, I want to say, of the Configuration Manager product. Might be wrong there, but I think that's about right. And it's an interesting kind of feature because you can kind of ingest these catalogs that various vendors provide. And I mean, these three are specific to, drivers. I think Fujitsu, I recently learned, even has a free catalog, which is just very random, I feel, right? I mean, I don't know. I don't hear of a lot of like huge Fujitsu enterprises, but I'm going to guess maybe other side of the ocean from where I'm at. Maybe that's a little more common. But yeah, they offer catalog, Dell, HP, Lenovo. They have some interesting caveats, like some of them will require agents for various purposes. I can kind of chat about what they're doing with that a little bit. And then also Adobe has a catalog. So Adobe has a free catalog that's going to let you patch a fair amount of their kind of mainstay products. And so you can use this feature to kind of just start patching some of these third-party components. I kind of had the drivers discussion a little bit. Jordan was trying to speak to that. It's tough, right? Because Intune, I don't know of a good solution to do anything vendor specific. And even these have drawbacks. They're interesting to work with. But aside from drivers, you can create your own catalog. You can use SCUP, which is still supported, the System Center Update Publisher, and do something very similar. You can make catalogs, you can publish them. So this is kind of what I'm starting with for the third-party update discussion when I'm saying like, third-party patching, these catalogs. You can also purchase catalogs from vendors. There's a handful of them. So let's kind of chat a little bit about what's the same between the third-party patching and first-party patching. And I mean, up front, I'm going to say that I'm assuming no WFB, right? We'll kind of touch on that later, but just want to compare kind of some of those differences with the Microsoft updates that you might be familiar with from WSUS and/or Configuration Manager, and then third-party patching. So they're both going to require WSUS, which we've seen, it's WSUS all the way down, right? It's always been WSUS. And you'll find even a lot of like third-party kind of app patching products. They rely on WSUS. So they're both going to rely on you being able to scan against your WSUS server / software update point. And that's ultimately to get metadata. And so that's just the information about the updates, which is just kind of all the goodness. It's not a ton of data, but it's ironically what will bring WSUS to its knees because of all kinds of fun shortcomings. And so how it's scanning against that software update point or WSUS, if you don't even have Configuration Manager set up or it's not integrated, you're going to be going through your CMG. It could still be IBCM, VPN, or maybe you're still back at the office. And so also, this all just still relies on the Windows Update agent, right? We can't really escape that. That is the mechanism built into Windows. It is kind of a core component to this. That is going to be what goes out to whatever endpoint you have for updates. It's going to get the metadata. It's going to process it, and that's going to dictate, what does it need? Where does it go to get it? Is it already installed, etc. Other components too, like is it going to reboot and any info like that. So part of that metadata and one of those similarity bits is applicability rules. And I kind of really like to show this because for a lot of people, updates are magic in a sense, right? It's like I deploy them and then the machine says I need it and it installed it and then it said it was installed. And you kind of take that for granted because Microsoft does it for you, right? They build all that logic and if it's not correct, that's on Microsoft. And with third-party updates, even from all these vendors, they have to build these out. And you can build them out yourself with the System Center Update Publisher tool. That's completely free. You can use that, right? You can build out a process to go and package your heavy hitter apps in SCUP and build these rules out and however you want, and then publish them in WSUS, get them into Configuration Manager and deploy them out. So it's like packaging. You are effectively creating applications in a way, right? You could really, you could deploy apps using WSUS if you want, if you just kind of play with this is installable rule, right? You can get kind of creative and do whatever you want. So it could be a fun thing to toy around with, but I just kind of appreciate showing this. You can see this, we've got an example. This is 7-zip, the XE version specifically, and we're just looking in the registry. You know, I want to find this uninstall hive, HKey local machine. I'm going to check the uninstall string. And then on top of that, so I'm going to make sure that exists. And then I also want to make sure that there's a specific version. That means it's up to date. So I always like to kind of show that. So, well, I mean, but I am using WFB. So what are the similarities to third-party patching and first-party patching? I'm using WFB. How do I do this? And so, I mean, there's like a handful of nothing really in terms of similarities because it's just not there. There's nothing native. There's nothing that is kind of in your face when it comes to third-party patching of any sort. If you're leveraging WFB and you're using these modern tools, drivers, we mentioned, how do you do it? I don't know. How do you do drivers with Intune that is targeted or informational? There's not like a wide scale way. So in terms of differences, you know, it's a continue the trend there. Everything. It's just not there right now. And so in terms of what is different, if we go back to assuming we're not talking about WFB, when you're dealing with your first party updates, right, they're signed by Microsoft. They're code signed by Microsoft. And that means you already trust them. Because when you're dealing with this content coming down from whatever source it is, it's got to be validated, and that validation comes in the form of code signing it, giving it a digital signature, and then that digital signature is ultimately a certificate, and that kind of goes down the pipeline, and you have to trust the CA, you have to trust the certificate authority. And so we'll kind of show that a little bit here in a minute. I should be able to pull up like a third-party update where the digital signature is not Microsoft. And on going kind of forward with that, with the content, Microsoft is maintaining all of this, you know, for first-party updates. They've got the CDN. They've already got that content delivery network out there. It's distributed. You can get your first-party patches from the Microsoft CDN. They serve it up. It's signed. It's trusted. And to kind of build on that, they've built that out. They built out like peer-to-peer mechanisms that take advantage of kind of the position they're in, where they're controlling all of the components. All the gears and cogs are in Microsoft's hands. So you can use Delta updates, which is kind of been interesting. They've had Express updates. They've had a few iterations. Kind of right now we're at Delta updates. And then to go hand in hand with that is DO, delivery optimization. So these are all kind of things that are going to be usable and specific to first-party updates. And first-party updates, I guess to clarify a little bit, you're talking really anything that Microsoft is serving up. So it's not just Windows, it's Office, it's any of the .NET patches. It could even be drivers. I mean, Microsoft does serve up drivers, you know, so anything that is natively coming down through the Microsoft catalog is really going to be the first-party updates that I'm referencing. Now, with third-party updates, kind of mention this, right? The code signing. When it comes to third-party updates, Microsoft isn't signing them, and because that's not happening, there's some additional considerations, right? You sign them. You have to go through some steps or use some tooling that goes through the steps for you to make sure that your files are signed by a certificate that your devices trust. So because of that, the content can't come from the Microsoft CDN. They don't have your signing certificate. It'd be bad if they did, because that means your certificate's compromised. They don't have your content. They can't distribute it out. So you've got to get that content accessible to your clients. How you do that, it's up to you. CMG, VPN, IBCM, internal DPs, or peer-to-peer. I mean, there's, as long as you can get information about the content, some of those peer-to-peer techs still work out there on the internet, which is kind of interesting. So you can actually use branch cache, for example, on your internet-based clients if they're all on the same subnet. Kind of an interesting thing to think about, right? If you've got I've seen scenarios where you've got a gathering at a hotel and you have I've seen site-to-site VPNs get set up between a corporation and a hotel that was all kind of predetermined. You've got a whole bunch of devices on the same switch, and you can leverage branch cache in that scenario. Or you could have the CMG. I've seen some interesting setups just to kind of compensate for not having that internal connection directly. And without that CDN, we do lose our Delta updates and our delivery optimization capabilities. And this actually causes some fun problems. They're, from what I know, still working on this a little bit. So I have a note here, right? Third-party updates, Delta update consideration, specifically for third-party updates. So this fun little feature, introduced it in 1910, and it's actually very cool because what it allows you to do is start serving up all updates through SCCM as Delta content. And so your clients can start pulling down just bits and pieces, right? Deltas of all of your updates. But there are actually notes in the docs. Oh, it scrolled me. Where did I go? Nope. There you go. So there's some fun notes in the docs where they say, okay, we did introduce it, but when you're using a CMG for content storage, the content for third-party updates won't download if download Delta content when available is set to enabled. And they make the same note in the delivery optimization section. So, okay, DO is available on all clients. You have to have internet access. But again, when using CMG for content storage, your third-party updates won't download. So this is just kind of a thing to keep in mind if you're going to go down this third-party route, or maybe you're already using third-party patching. They introduced this feature in 1910. It's actually had a couple bug fixes. I mean, the initial 2002 version had fixes for Delta updates. But then even after that, there was some hot fixes that introduced a whole bunch of additional fixes as well. But this issue persists. So beyond that, one thing that we will actually see before I go through this slide, let me find the log snippet. So when you do, now let me grab mine. When you're dealing with third-party updates via a CMG, you have an interesting kind of flow for how things work. So this is a device that was on the internet and was attempting to download a patch, third-party patch from the internal environment. So SCCM port 80 content, very bizarre URL there. So content D8, if you've ever dealt with WSUS, right? This is the structure to WSUS. I've got my content directory, I've got the subfolder, and then I've got a cab file. But this is odd, port 80. Some environments use it, but not everybody. And then even more so, we've got 8530, just both. Now, this is an internet-based device that I'm pointing at a CMG, and it does this over and over. We can see it loops it one time, it loops it two times, kind of working through these lists. And then it decides to finally make it to my CMG. So this is a kind of a current limitation of third-party patching via CMG, Microsoft's aware of it, and it's just kind of something you have to live with. So it's 3 retries with 2 minutes, delays in between total. So even when you go to click install on third-party patches on a cloud-managed device over a CMG, it's going to sit there and say waiting to download for a very long time, longer than it should, like 6 minutes per update, which is just terrible. But that's what we got to work with right now. It feels very legacy. So this port 80 bit here is interesting. We recently had a customer, and generally this isn't an issue outside of being annoying, but we did have a fun one. So it's always DNS. You typically don't control your employees' internet when they're home. Maybe you do, but I'm going to say generally, right? You can't rely on that being a thing. And some internet providers do interesting things when DNS lookup failures happen. So I think this particular one, I want to say it was AT&T. They have some sort of, I think, a DNS Error Assist, which sounds great, but it's not. So if you do, with this scenario, any single time the client on the AT&T internet at home would fail a DNS lookup, it would automatically, because of the DNS configuration on their home router, get redirected to this dnserrorassist.com, and it would resolve and download content if you were to do, for example, an invoke-web request. So if you're just trying to, or if you're using like a .NET, client or something, or what the SCCM client does, just try to invoke a download. I want to get that cab file. So you've got your employee at home who has this who knows what internet, and there's DNS redirection in place that you don't really have immediate control over. The client actually reached out and found the file. That's mine. This one. So let's see here. Here it is. Scroll up a little bit. Yeah, here we go. Awesome. So what we have is it kind of doing its typical scans, and you're kind of seeing the localities change. But what it ended up doing was, and I missed the other log, I had it. There was a content transfer manager log, and I wish I had it. But right here, this kind of little snippet, it was interesting. We would click install on an update, and it would immediately download, just instantaneously. It was like, oh, done. And then immediately it would throw an error. And we would see this. The hash value is not correct. Like, what's going on? This is really weird. It's getting the cab file. Why is it getting the cab file? Why is the hash incorrect? So it's like, yeah, maybe it's AV, right? I don't know. Everyone loves to blame AV. I love to blame AV. So let's disable it, whatever. We kind of went through those hoops, and ultimately it wasn't AV at all, which I guess I'm kind of glad. And I was curious, what was it downloading? And so I went to the URL. I grabbed the URL out of the other log, and I go to the website, and it's like, dnserrorassist.com. Okay, it can't resolve it, no problem. But then I go and I ping it. I ping, the local host, SCCM port 80, and at the domain, and it worked. It responded to the ping. I'm like, that's kind of weird. So then I pull up PowerShell. I do invoke-web request. I point to the URL, and it downloads the cab file, kind of quote a cab file. It downloaded a completely bogus 1 kilobyte cab file that was exactly what it requested. I was able to pass any random thing I wanted to invoke web request, and it just downloaded a 1 kilobyte cab file. It's like, thank you, DNS. So immediately it would get downloaded. SCCM said, this isn't the file I want, and it says the download failed. And There's a handful of fixes you can kind of do for this. I mean, AT&T lets you turn this feature off. I don't know about other vendors. You can go and just change your DNS, your home DNS. You can just point it to whatever, 8.8 Google, OpenDNS, whatever you want. Just stop using whatever vendor is doing that. And that fixed it as well. But it was kind of a just bizarre thing to run into because it seems a little innocuous. It doesn't even seem like it would be a big deal outside of being annoying that I would kind of walk through these. I can't access it. I'm external. I want to talk to my CMG. And then delay, no big deal. But then all of a sudden, oh, I really can't work in this scenario. So let's see. Before I do this, I do want to kind of show off just a couple small things. Let's see. I know Jordan actually touched on the big ones. No, I don't need that. Oh, actually, over here. So one of the interesting things when you're dealing with the CMG, when you actually check the box, I guess I can actually show that. You do need this. It's very important. Things don't work if you don't have it. And you can have more than one checked. There's nothing wrong with that. You can have multiple endpoints. If you've got a large environment or if you've got some business requirement around redundancy of some sort, you can kind of evaluate having multiple software update points that have this box checked. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, when you check that box, you can investigate the role endpoints here on your CMG, and you'll actually see the role names, client web service and simple auth web service. And you can just kind of see whatever, all the other good stuff, response size. And if we pull up, I should have had this open. Yes. Those are the two components that it exposes over your CMG via that proxy to allow your clients to do their Windows Update Agent scans, their WSUS scans against your internal WSUS server. So these two components actually are what ends up getting moved over to your client or presented to your client remotely. It's kind of cool. Let's see here. So, I mean, this is all legacy, right? WSUS. Who wants to deal with WSUS? I don't. I'm kidding. I work all day with WSUS. I love WSUS, but this is legacy. WSUS has been around a while. Patch with SCCM has been around a while. So what are we going to do? Well, with some of the tools in Intune and Defender ATP. So within ATP, you can kind of view things such as a security recommendation. And I can see that it is recommending that I update Mozilla Firefox to version 79. I can click that. And it's going to give me some good info, exposed devices. I could export this. That's useful. It's my device. Uh-oh. Don't show the boss. I'm vulnerable. Let's see here. Other good stuff. CVEs. You can do some craftiness with Graph here. And you can create remediation options. Now, at first, it's like, oh, that's cool. What's it going to do? Is it going to install Firefox for me? No, it's not. I wish it did. That'd be really cool. But you can get it to that point, right? You can create the tooling around this. So you've got this little checkbox. Open a ticket in Intune for AAD joined devices. You can kind of do some other bits and pieces here. You can give it a due date, prioritize it, make some notes, and then if you really want to, maybe dump things onto a CVE. So I've already created this just because it can take a sec sometimes. And I can see within ATP here, within my remediation section, here it is. It's got a description, it's got a bit of info, tells you the service name where this remediation can happen, just kind of those bits and pieces. And if you did happen to make any notes or anything, this was me, this should be updated. Other things like that. So good info. And then you can go and mark it here, completed, export to CSV. Now, with that though, let's see, I thought I had, here it is, it's in, yeah, we'll pull it up there. If we pull this up on the Intune side, we should be able to go under endpoint security and then security tasks. And so within here, this is that ticket that they were referencing. This is what actually got created by ATP. So here's a fun little piece. Cool, accept or reject it if you want. How many devices are impacted? That's nice. Any of those notes, it's all going to get translated over. It's not a managed app in this instance. So some useful information. This is pretty valuable because having an app managed gives you a lot more flexibility and control. You know, Simon kind of showed a lot of the awesome possibilities around that. And it gives you this little snippet, kind of informational, but almost comical. And it's like, well, yeah, go get Firefox, go and yeah, update it. And then either remove it from all of your devices or just remove it from all of your devices. So, you know, remove the old stuff and potentially deploy it to your devices. Now, it's tough because, yeah, you've got this, you've got your impacted devices, but you don't, you know, it's static. You've got to come in here and you've got to say, okay, I got a ticket. I need to update Firefox. I've got this list of devices. I'm going to export it. I'm going to go create a group. I'm going to go target those devices with the new app I created and kind of monitor it. And then I'm going to go say it's complete and make sure ATP is happy. It's just tedious. So within ATP, let's just say we wanted to at least simplify things a little bit. Let's take some of the data we have. We've got ATP, we've got Firefox, and Firefox will actually tell you the software evidence that it used. Now, it's unfortunate that this is kind of the discovery method alone, just because it's tough. I mean, a lot of products are going to suffer the same thing, but, oh, I should have left it open. Ironically, I actually don't even have this software installed anymore. It's been updated. But ATP doesn't know that. So this is why it thinks it's installed. HKLM, software, Microsoft Windows, current version uninstall, Firefox 76. And you can see it actually says it's installed in app data. That per user install. I can pull that folder up. It's empty. There's nothing there. And Firefox is not installed. What I do have installed is the latest version. I'm already compliant. We're good. But that's its discovery bit. So we'll assume that this is accurate. We'll assume that I can use this key. This is how it discovered it. So what I want to do is use this information and I'm going to create an update for Mozilla Firefox. I'm just reusing something. This is all, you know, stuff that we're doing. You can go download the Firefox binary and use Firefox. You know, this is just wrapper stuff. It's completely irrelevant. What it boils down to, the interesting part of this is I can come in here and, you know, I'm not going to kind of dig into like, oh, here's how you do all of the app components. But what's interesting about Win32 apps, something that you can do here, we kind of talked about applicability rules, right? We showed off that applicability rule, and they're really neat. Applicability rules give you that advantage of just blasting out an update. You don't care if the device needs it because the Windows Update agent is going to evaluate the applicability rule, and it's going to tell you if it needs it, and it's going to just work. So If it doesn't need it, it doesn't install it. Cool. In Intune, when you deploy out an application, you can't target all the devices that have the app, right? You can't go and say, well, I want to update Firefox. Let me create a query that says who has Firefox. That's not currently there. It's not an option. And Intune inventory is really not even to that point. Intune inventory has its own, the native stuff has its own limitations around what it collects. It's like only MSIs right now, which is a little problematic. And then modern apps as well, but those usually kind of update themselves. So with that in mind, we want to kind of recreate, at least in some sense, the applicability rule. And so what we can actually do is create an app. We're going to call it the update for Firefox. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add a requirement. Now, do it however you want. This is going to be very application specific. In this scenario, I was able to go into ATP and use that little bit of information with how it discovered the software. And I'm going to actually just copy paste. Here we go. If this key exists, value name, don't even care. Key exists. OK. So now I've created a requirement for this. So if I deploy this out to my devices, do it as required, right? Because who does optional updates? Deploy it as required. I'm going to deploy Firefox out to my devices. It's going to evaluate this requirement script. And if this key isn't there, which if ATP is using it for discovery, we'll say, all right, it's pretty valid. You know, it's at least decent. If Firefox is on the device, specifically this vulnerable version, this app is now required. If it's not there, the app's not required. It's not installable. It's not needed, right? It's recreation of the applicability rule. And then you can do your detection rule just however you want, using a script in this case, but you could come in here. You could go build out your MSI. If you're doing the MSI for Firefox, you could just go and pop in the equivalent for 79, check version strings, you know, however you want to do it. All those typical things. And the end result, though, is you care a little bit less, or almost not at all, about targeting. Now, I was kind of working on something a little bit. I wanted to kind of take this workflow and automate it, and I didn't fully flesh it out, and it's not something that I'm going to toss out there right now. But that's kind of the workflow that you could really build up as an organization, a tooling. You could look at ATP. You can query for CVEs. You can query for vulnerabilities. You can see the devices that have it, and then you could go and pull that data. You can package these apps, or at least maybe automate the creation of Intune tickets. And those Intune tickets can then get, you know, kind of fired off as pieces of information. And you can even pull like that discovery rule, and you could toss that out there and say, hey, guess what? You need to go and take action on this. Here's how we discovered the software. Here's the version that we would like you to go to, or the latest version that we found. Go package it up in Intune and deploy it out. And if you can kind of follow the requirement detection flow, you can just blast it out, you know? So yeah, I mean, it's nice to see that ATP is giving me some of that discovery data, but maybe you don't have ATP even. So take ATP out of the picture. You can still follow this requirement detection rule logic, and you can deploy out Firefox 79 to every device in your organization. But it's only going to install, which really update, if Firefox is there. You've kind of recreated an update, and you don't have to rely on WSUS anymore, which I think a lot of people will really appreciate. So that is really kind of the end goal here, is to move towards being able to do kind of modern third-party patching, where you at least have some control. There's a lot of value in consistency across your environment, and knowing that you are remediating these vulnerabilities, and you can kind of be a little bit more lax in terms of how you target things, just like you do with WSUS in your Windows updates. You can just blast things out, and there you go. So that really is kind of what I've developed to hopefully show what's possible for a transition from old school WSUS to modern patching. And we've tried to do this as a vendor in some way. We're trying to explore these ideas because really we're just trying to get very creative, because I can imagine it's got to be tough to manage who knows how many devices across all these different areas, third-party apps. You don't even have a full picture of what's out there, especially if you don't have ATP. So you got to get really creative. And these are kind of components that you can build yourself. That's what's really awesome about it. Like Graph is great. You can go hit Graph and you can automate all of this. If you've done tooling and PowerShell, this is all very, very accessible. It's just a matter of kind of reaching out for it and just digging in. That's a lot of cool tools around Graph Explorer. Hopefully kind of start maybe doing a little bit of Graph demoing. I don't have something right now. I've got some nice Graph code, but I want to maybe provide a tool set. It's kind of alluding to it. It'd be nice to provide this as like a community tool set where you can go and query ATP or query Intune, get this data, and even just provide recommendations kind of up front. So if you can potentially give this to your app packagers, if you have an organization that has app packagers, you can say, hey, here's the ATP data, here's the Intune data, these need done, or create those tickets, and provide those bits and pieces that are available to just make apps. So yeah, that's pretty much what I've got.
That's really cool, Cody. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Is it something that you get asked a lot at Patch My PC about delivering some of those updates now from Intune rather than Config Manager?
So it really is, and it comes from two perspectives, though. You have organizations who are saying we don't have config man at all, and we're implementing Intune, and we need to do third-party remediation. But we also have it where it's like we want to move to Intune, and I mean this is a blocker for a lot of organizations. They say we want to get off a configuration manager. I don't want this anymore, right? I've gotten that vibe from Microsoft. Maybe they'll say, because some people have. You'll hear preached that it's not the case, and I agree. It's probably not the case. Config man's staying around, but a lot of organizations are moving towards Intune, and this is an ask. They need to patch third-party apps.
Yeah, it's a big thing, isn't it? Because, like I say, the Win32 app is really cool. It's a lot of work for somebody, isn't it, to sit there and build those for the organization.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, it's cool. Hopefully, with time, things will change. But yes, it's a good eye opener. I mean, I guess the thing I've seen as well is that there's sometimes the attitude that third-party patching is difficult and I won't do it, and that's always a bad decision, isn't it? Because there are tools out there that does make it easier, like you say. I'm just looking through the chat to see if there's any questions for Cody on.
Yeah, for sure. Blame DNS.
Yeah, Dan's asking. He maybe thinks that Patch My PC had just released something new to automate patching.
Yeah, we did. I prefaced it up front, like, no, I don't want to like chill, right? This is like from my perspective, I think that these things are interesting because even in what we do as a vendor is completely doable by any given organization. We're using Graph API. We're not magicians. We don't have any secret codes. But absolutely, yeah, we did release a feature that kind of works around this idea to hopefully provide third-party patching. But really, you can do it yourself. But yeah, so I mean, feel free to kind of check that out. It's pretty neat. We work pretty hard on it.
Yeah, cool. Maybe we can get a link in there for people to have a look at in the chat if you get time.
I think Dan actually dropped the links for it.
Did he?
Looks like it, yeah.
Dan's on the ball. Thank you, Dan. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Cody. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It flowed really well. the information was really applicable. You know, we're all asking those questions, and if we're not, we should be. So that did fit in really well with the theme of the event. So
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Cool. And yeah, I've asked the presenters, and I'm sure they will send their links to their presentations. So we'll send a link out at the end of the event. We are recording the event, so as long as the demo gods are good to us, hopefully when we stop that recording, it'll be good, and we can share the event out afterwards. We'll probably put a link on the meetup page, and maybe put it on Twitter as well, just so people can watch this back if they missed elements of it. It has been a long day, but a really, really valuable day, I think. So unfortunately, Leon couldn't be with us today because of work commitments, but both Leon and I are very grateful for everybody who's participated today. So we just like to pass our thanks on. You guys all rock and make the community what it is. We value your expertise and your time. So thank you very much. We haven't got another schedule for our next EEMUG event, but we'll put something up. I think we spoke about maybe doing something in autumn. The landscape may have changed again, and we'll probably have all new challenges to face. So we'll put something relevant together for maybe the autumn time. Yeah, just leaves it for me now to say thank you for everybody for coming on today. We hope it's been useful. I've certainly found it amazing. So until next time, I wish you all safe and well, and live long and prosper.